How you doing? Well, I'm gonna share some native history about who I believe is the two witnesses. That a cult has taken this information and twisted it to make it say it was Jesus, Yeshua, when it wasn't. And listening to the testimony from these natives, you can tell it's not Jesus. They're not saying they're Jesus. And in my opinion, John is the silver-haired one, and the curly-haired one is Thomas. This is history recorded of what these witnesses, of Yeshua's life, the miracles, the death, and the resurrection, and to go to the right hand of the Father. These ones seen it. And so I eventually found the book where I can read the stories and without the cult like influence. So we'll go through the chapters without the twist of it being pushed as being Yeshua when it's not Yeshua, Jesus. And you'll see how the ones who walked with Yeshua led the people to walk as, and they were to walk in love. And the cult has hid this truth from people about the two that can't be killed until the time in which it is Yahweh's will. And the testimonies that I'm going to read share. So I'll start at the beginning. We'll start here. Polynesia. And remember, these ones, just like the Egyptians considered Moses a god, these ones considered these men of God. The god Wakia. Once in the days long vanished, with 3 great ships which had sailed from the sunset land, came white-robed Wakia, the fair god who healed the injured, raised the dead, and walked on water. He came to an outlying island of the Talatian group. If I mispronounce any of these tribes' names, and I apologize right now because I'm bad for now. Group where 2 tribes were fighting bitterly. Now, however, the Polynesians are all one people, anciently calling themselves Maura, from New Zealand to Easter Island off the South American coastline. They were the Vikings of the sunrise, rowing their longboats over the trackless ocean, guiding themselves by the stars of the heavens, and speaking one language from Hawaii southward. They used the same plant, kept the same animals, and sang the same songs of the ancient. One of these was of the god Wakia. To an island where men were fighting for the possession of the good land came 3 ships with giant sails like enormous birds, with wings uplifted, glowing goldenly in the dawn light. Suddenly frozen to immobility were the warriors as the ships moved around the jutting headline. What manner of monsters are these with the great wings? Perhaps they have come to devour the people. Forgotten was the heat of the battle. Friend and foe stood facing seaward, weapons clutched in paralyzed fingers, staring in wide-eyed wonder. The ship's oarsmen, whose paddles looked like 100 centipede legs touching the water, rested now from their task of moving the giant monster forward. Then the islanders saw something white moving toward them. Apparently had come from the great bird, and it glided easily over the water with the rhythmic ease of a man walking. As the spot of white came closer, they saw in amazement that this was a fair god, man-like in form, but unlike their people. Soon they could see him clearly, the gold of the dawn light shining behind him and around him, making a halo of his long curly hair and beard. They saw the foam-like swish of his garments. As he came up on the wet sand, the warriors stared in fright as his garments, they were dry. Now they knew that a god stood among them, for none but gods can walk on water. From his garments, so foam white, they looked to his pale face and then to his eyes. They were strange eyes, gray-green as the depths of the water, and like it, ever changing. Now those eyes flashed with anger as he stared about him and looked upon the injured. A god had come from the sea to walk among them, and his first look was that of anger. The warriors fell down as one man and began an old chant, anciently employed to a God for forgiveness. When they dared again to raise up their own eyes, they saw him going among the injured and dying, who arose from their pain to find themselves well of body as soon as his hand or his garment had touched them. Thus, on this never-to-be-forgotten day, came the beloved Wakia to live for a while among the people. When the villagers arrived with presents, creeping on their knees toward him, he signaled the ships. Small boats now left the great bird and brought other strangers. These men, though something like him in features, and like him bearded, were different in two ways from the god, Wakia. Most plain to see was that their garments were not white, but colored. But there was something besides this material different. It was the way these friends looked upon their leader. In their eyes one could see their reverence. In their strange speech one could feel their great love. Friend and foe among the Polynesians now set about to entertain the stranger, putting forth their choicest dishes, making welcome with song and dances. They invited the strangers to partake of the great feast. They had planned an entire night of merrymaking, but at last, as the sun began to paint the western sky with the colors of the orchid, hanging in the profusion in the forest, they could see that the strangers were preparing to leave them. The sadness they had felt at this discovery was suddenly reversed when they saw the strangers bidding tearful farewell to the god Wakia. Scarcely had the people dreamed of this good fortune, for now it was becoming very obvious that the god Wakia was planning no journey, but would remain among them. Respectfully, at a short distance stood the people, while Wakia comforted the tearful stranger. They saw him point to the direction of the sunrise, and wondered among themselves what he might be saying in his strange language. Then, after further embraces, they watched the strangers enter the small boats and row back to the great bird ship. As Wakia stood there on the sand watching sadly, the chief stepped up quietly and pointed to a high point which looked over the jutting headland around which the ships were now passing. Wakia nodded quickly, followed the chief and some of the people to the sun-painted high point. There they together watched the three ships move into the sunset, fading at last into the sea of beauty. Only then did they return to the village, and the great ships were never more seen by the tribesmen. Very quickly Wakia learned Polynesian. The people were amazed at the speed of his learning, the gift of tongue. As the long days passed, he began to teach the tribesmen. He told them of the one god who ruled the heaven, who spoke through the volcanoes and who breathed on the ocean. To him, war was not of his making, for his law was to love one another. For Wakia, they gave up the war and the sacrifice of children, which had kept down their population so they would not overeat their island. Then the men carried him with them, taking Wakia from island to island, so each one would meet the strange fair god, whose hands were miracles of healing. Many then were the songs of Wakia, and many the legends, which down through the long vistas of time have been forgotten. Yet his name has never been forgotten. Wakia had one strange custom. Every morning before dawn he would rise and pray toward the dawn star on some high point facing seaward. When they asked him why he did this, he said that even so would his friends be praying in that far-off land across the ocean. The people thought of that day when he had come to them, of his friends who had wept when they were leaving, and how he had pointed for them toward the sunrise heaven. Finally, the fair god knew well all of the island, and there was not one where he had not landed, feasted with, and taught the people. It was then that he looked more often towards the direction of the dawning, and asked questions about the lands of the dawn star. The people were not entirely unacquainted with the continent lying eastward. Did they not have the yam to eat and call it by its ancient South American name? Yet they were loath to lose the healer, this strange god who answered to the name they had given him, Waikia, the fair god of the ocean. As long as they could, they tried to dissuade his growing wish to travel eastward. Yet they loved him too much to deny his desire, and so preparations were made for the long journey to be made in the boats of the migration. Through their tears, the people watched him take his seat in the longboat, while one child called out in a voice broken by sobbing, "Are we never again to see you, Waikia?" In his malicious voice, I guess. The fair god answered, "One day you will see me returning, even as I came, through the light of the dawning, if you remember to keep my commandment and always love one another." The canoes of many rowers carried much food and water. Through wind and storm they stayed together, keeping each other in sight in the daytime and at night by alternative chanting. Thus, from the islands and into the sunrise, rode the longboats carrying Waikia, beautiful creature of peace and laughter, whose curly brown hair trapped the red gold of sunlight, and whose strange level eyes held the sea's deepest mystery, chanting like the water in the light and shadow. So the fair god moved into the dawn toward the lands of the dawn star, sped onward by the chants of farewell sung by the sorrowing people. And since that day, though some have said that he is sometimes seen in spirit, yet in the flesh they are still waiting for him to come back to his beloved islands of Polynesia.